things come on your lap and you have to react to them, but then making sure that that counters with the balance both for family or other things or people that are important to us. I often talk about like, what are my cup filling activities? And that was something I learned from another entrepreneur many years ago. And thinking in that way, right? Is it taking an extra 15 minutes on my morning run, right? I might take an extra loop. I might, instead of, vegging out in front of the TV one evening, spend that time on a creative endeavor. Balance to me is really making time for all the things that are important to me, even if it's exhausting, but ultimately like it feels a lot more rewarding and fulfilling.
These things are often exhausting, but it's finding that, again, that balance between what's important and, making time for it. Welcome to A Founder's Life. I'm your host, Leo Gestetner. On this show, we dive into the real stories behind the highs and lows of entrepreneurship and how we pursue a more balanced and meaningful life along the way. This podcast is sponsored by Thankz, helping founders like us scale with reliable remote talent. Email founders@thankz.com, that's THANKZ.com, with the subject line of Founder's Life, and you'll receive $1,000 off your first month. Well, I'm excited today to be joined by Natalie Nathanson. Natalie, thank you for joining. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you for having me. So Natalie Nathanson, I've spent my career in go-to-market roles in the B2B tech sector primarily. And 13 years ago, founded my marketing consultancy, Magnetude Consulting, that works across B2B, SMBs, and mid-market. And then about a year and a half ago, I launched my own podcast, Shift and Thrive, where I interview CEOs, founders, and other executives on how they drive change and innovation in their organizations and transformation within themselves.
Excellent. And talk a little bit about that journey that got you to where you are, and then a little bit more information on sort of what you're doing, what a customer looks like, what you're doing for your customers.
I came from the in-house side and really had spent my career in really across different marketing environments, being in some cases at a startup as a marketing team of one, trying to do everything and anything needed and not always having the budget or expertise to do justice everywhere. I spent a number of years at the analyst firm Forrester Research. I ran one of the 3 business unit marketing teams there and was part of a much larger marketing organization. So seeing what's possible when you do have a team of experts working together, which is not the luxury in smaller company environments. So all of that to say that really use those experiences to start Magnetude Consulting to build a different kind of marketing firm than one that I had really experienced on the in-house side, and one that really caters to the needs of B2B startups and SMBs, really coming in as a fractional marketing department. And sometimes augmenting small teams, sometimes being the fully outsourced marketing department. So depending on a client and their journey and what they need. And I would say marketing is a field that's constantly evolving. I would say never more so than, in the last few years. And so part of what we do really view ourselves as being the growth wingmen for our clients, knowing that each marketing strategy looks different. Each client's marketing journey looks different, whether it makes sense to outsource initially, to bring marketing in-house at a certain point, right? Looking at the different organizational models. And then right now, with where we are with generative AI and automation, like what are the right ways to use that? How do you kind of break through the noise when you often don't have the same resources as a larger organizations, right? Financial resources, size of team, brand reputation, all of that. So a lot of the work we do is really how do you use marketing as a growth enabler to the organization, and recognizing that spans across kind of strategic planning, strategic foundations, and then hands-on, like roll up our sleeves execution.
Sounds like you can add a lot of value to customers. And I think definitely the marketing world is changing, especially with AI and SEO. Not quite sure. Traditional SEO really is going to exist much longer, but obviously you can make it SEO for AI. And tell me a little bit about what family means to you.
I mean, family is so important. I would say I grew up in an environment where, very tight, close-knit family. Every family has their drama, their chaos, when we get together for big family events and all of that. But I would say the biggest shift for me was a little over a decade ago, becoming a parent. I have a 9 and 11-year-old, and I think that's just added a layer to just what family means, and has been humbling, I would say, in what I've learned from the process. And I maybe come in a bit naively thinking that, you can kind of shape your children and they'll like the things that you like. And sometimes, yes, but also, right, each child is their own person, has their own interests. Like the number of things that I've been able to learn from my kids, and then I would say, like, similarly, like with my team, is being able to create an environment where it's not an either or of kind of being there for your kids while also doing top notch work and being very career driven and all of that. And that's something that, in the last like 10 years or so in the business is something that I've really prided myself on how we've kind of managed that internally.
Excellent. I look forward to hearing more about that in a second. So tell me what health looks like for you, whether that be mental health, physical health, nutrition, exercise. How does health look?
Yeah, I would say all of those areas that you mentioned, I do tend to look at that from a fairly 360-degree view. The things that are maybe I view as necessary evils, like good sleep, are necessary. And so I do invest in those and respect the importance of them. Food wise, I would say trying to stay away from processed foods. And I've gotten into gardening the last 5 years or so. It started as a pandemic, a lockdown hobby that's really blossomed from there. And so even just growing my own vegetables and herbs has given me a different appreciation for kind of what that takes and recognizing what's in season at different times of the year and how that impacts kind of what to buy from regular stores. And then my favorite area to talk about is the exercise and movement side. I just get so much out of being active and especially like outdoors. So running, something I've been doing for decades. Biking has been newer. I was training for my first sprint triathlon last year and kind of overcame my fear of biking on busy roads. I love open water swims, setting new goals with hikes. So, all of those kinds of things, I think, especially for those of us who sit behind a desk and in front of computers for much of our day, I like that contrast of spending my free time, outdoors when I can.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to push yourself a little. I mean, like triathlons are fun. And I think, whether it be triathlons, I've done a bunch of triathlons, or whether it be marathons I'm into at the moment, I'll come back to triathlons. I think it's fun to do something that pushes yourself a little, push you outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs, like we are very goal driven. And so, how does that apply when you're coming up with the fun parts of your life outside of work as well? But there can be, a very rewarding feeling to reaching those kinds of goals.
Very true. And what do you like to do for fun?
So certainly a lot of the kind of active areas that I just mentioned. I talked a little bit about gardening, which I think one of the things I enjoy beyond the feeling of, right, I'm creating things that we can then kind of eat and enjoy and all of that. I like that there's a never ending pool of learning to be had. So it's like peeling back an onion. You learn one thing that begs, 5 more questions, and then you can learn about those. So the curiosity and the constant learning, I think, that comes with something like that. We were talking about AI earlier. I'm constantly now asking ChatGPT questions about, well, my tomatoes did this, and what if I tried that, and what is the history of this form of fertilizer, right? So things like that I find very dorkily energizing. And then also creating things from a more like crafty sort of way. So I most recently am very into creating things with resin, so jewelry, trays, things like that, and just get to flex the kind of tactile creative muscles as well.
And you started touching earlier, but talk a little bit about what balance means to you, that balance across those different aspects, so across work, family, health, fun. How does that balance look like for you?
Yeah, I think being very intentional about it is the key. You touched on this, but it doesn't need to look the same at every moment in time. Some periods at work are very hectic. Sometimes that's planned, and you go into a certain season knowing there's a lot of speaking engagements and work travel and new client activity and all of that. Other times it's more right opportunistic. Things come on your lap and you have to react to them. But then making sure that that counters with the balance both for family or other things or people that are important to us. I often talk about like what are my cup filling activities, and that was something I learned from another entrepreneur many years ago. And thinking in that way, right? Is it taking an extra 15 minutes on my morning run, right? I might take an extra loop. I might, instead of, vegging out in front of the TV one evening, spend that time on a creative endeavor. And so balance to me is really making time for all the things that are important to me, even if it's exhausting, but ultimately like it feels a lot more rewarding and fulfilling.
I think, yeah, these things are often exhausting, but it's finding that, again, that balance between what's important and, making time for it. What has been a pivotal moment for you in your life?
I would say there have been a few moments. The big one, and I think a lot of folks had a reckoning around the pandemic, but for me, that was a kind of a monumental time of both schedule change. My kids were very young at the time, so a lot of chaos as far as kids were both home from school. They were 3 and 5 years old. My husband and I both have demanding jobs, him in corporate America, myself running a business. The business was doing very well, thankfully, so didn't want to miss out on those opportunities. And then my father was ill, Alzheimer's, and it was getting worse pretty quickly. And kind of the lockdown didn't do anyone very well there. And so I think that the pivotal moment was really like, how do I show up and respond to that? We talked about balance a few minutes ago, but making sure that I was keeping kind of all the right balls in the air, that I was doing so in a way that was still healthy for myself, like mentally, physically, showing up how I wanted to for my family or my employees, still kind of feeling good about all the decisions I was making. And so I do feel like it might sound a little cheesy, but came out stronger on the other end of it. And that kind of intentionality, I think, is something that I've carried with me since then.
And what's one piece of advice you would give for an aspiring entrepreneur?
I've said this in some mentorship environments I've been in, is you only get to be new once. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think when you're starting something new, you can ask for help, ask different kinds of questions, interview your target market in different ways. There's tons of resources out there. When I was getting started with my business, there was an organization called SCORE where I got a mentor. There was an SBA program I was part of. So really looking at what are those resources available to you. And then the second I would say is talking to customers early and often, and customers, but also just the target market at large. And I think that might sound obvious, but I've seen enough environments where you might start by an understanding of the pain points of the target market, but then you're building a solution and can kind of lose why you're doing it and who you're doing it for. I think that can, whether it's kind of anchor points in your offering or how you think about like service delivery or the user experience in the product. I think those areas are just really important to always keep front and center. And in a world where things are changing quickly with technology, with kind of changes in kind of generational changes, we don't want to take anything for granted. We want to be talking to the people that we're trying to support and serve and understand the best way to do that.
And how can people find you?
So I would say LinkedIn is probably the best. I'm very active on there. Natalie Nathanson. I think there's only two of us. The other one is a lawyer. So I'm the founder and CEO of Magnetude Consulting. Would love if folks are interested in checking out my podcast, Shift and Thrive, and always happy to connect.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to connect.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, and leave a review.